There is an episode of South Park that aired the night before a real person died. There is a voice actress who played nearly every female character in the show's first 3 seasons, whose name almost nobody who watched those episodes knew. There is a file hidden on a children's golf game disc from 1999 that got the game recalled from stores on Christmas morning. There are 5 episodes of one of the most watched animated shows in television history that you cannot legally stream anywhere on Earth right now. None of this is speculation. None of this is fan theory. All of it is real. All of it is documented, and almost none of it gets talked about in the same place at the same time. This is the South Park Iceberg. 10 sections, 27 seasons of a show that has been doing stranger, darker, and more consequential things than most people realize, hiding them in plain sight inside a cartoon about 4 kids in Colorado. Welcome to East Park. Let's get into it. The 2 shorts nobody talks about, the true origin story. There is a file sitting on a PlayStation disc from 1999 that was never supposed to be there. If you put that disc into a computer, not a PlayStation, a computer, and dug through the raw data, you would find a hidden video file named zzdummy.dat. The game was Tiger Woods 99. It was rated E for everyone. The video hidden inside it was absolutely not for everyone. It was a crude, foul-mouthed, violent animated short film made by 2 college kids 6 years earlier, and when children started finding it on Christmas morning after unwrapping what their parents thought was a golf game, Electronic Arts had to recall the entire product. That short film was the thing that became South Park, and almost nobody knows the full story of how it got there, or how close the whole thing came to never existing at all. Let's go back to 1992. The University of Colorado at Boulder. 2 students named Trey Parker and Matt Stone meet in a film class. Parker is studying music and film. Stone is studying math. They should not, on paper, have anything in common. But the moment they start talking, something clicks. They share the same kind of humor, the kind that makes most people uncomfortable. They both love Monty Python, they love the band Primus, and they both find themselves doing the exact same thing when they work on other students' film projects, making silly voices to entertain each other. Little kid voices mostly. High-pitched, stupid, funny little voices. They do this for a full year before it ever occurs to either of them to actually put those voices on film. When Parker finally decides to make something, he makes it fast. He takes construction paper, scissors, glue, and an old 8mm film camera. That is the entire budget. No computers, no professional equipment, just paper cutouts photographed frame by frame in what is called stop-motion animation. The result is a 4-minute short film called The Spirit of Christmas, which most people now refer to as Jesus vs. Frosty to tell it apart from the second film they would make later. In it, 4 young boys build a snowman and bring it to life using a magic hat. The snowman turns out to be evil and starts killing people. The boys call on Jesus for help. It ends with a moral about the true meaning of Christmas. It premiered at the December 1992 student film screening at the university. The audience laughed. Parker and Stone filed it away and moved on. Here is the first thing most people do not know. In that original 1992 short, the characters are not quite who you think they are. The fat kid, the one who would eventually become Eric Cartman, is named Kenny. The hooded kid, the one who would eventually become Kenny McCormick, is not named at all. The 2 other boys are nameless too. Even Stan and Kyle, the characters who feel most like the show's anchors, have no names in that first film. The character that would become Cartman is the one who dies first in that short, and the line the other kids say when it happens is already fully formed. Oh my god, they killed Kenny! The DNA of the show is all there. The names are just scrambled. 3 years pass. Parker and Stone have graduated. They have moved to Los Angeles to try to make it in the film industry. They are not making it. Matt Stone is sleeping on dirty laundry because he cannot afford a mattress. They write scripts, they pitch ideas, they make short films when they can. Nothing catches. Then a Fox executive named Brian Graydon sees a screening of a film they made called Cannibal the Musical, and he loves it enough to call them up with an offer. Graydon wants a Christmas card. Not a paper card, a video Christmas card. He wants Parker and Stone to make a short animated film that he can send to his friends as a holiday greeting. He will pay them $2,000 to do it. Parker and Stone keep $750 for production costs and pocket the rest. What they make is the second Spirit of Christmas short, the one most people now call Jesus vs. Santa. This one is different from the 1992 film in ways that matter enormously. The town is explicitly called South Park. The kids are named for the first time: Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny. Kyle is established as Jewish. Cartman's anti-Semitism is already present. Kenny dies and rats eat his body, which would become a recurring element. There is even a girl sitting on Santa's lap in one scene who looks exactly like Wendy Testaberger. The entire blueprint of the series is in this one short film film made for $2,000 as a holiday present. Graydon sends the tape to 80 friends in December 1995. One of those friends makes a copy and sends it to someone else. That someone else makes copies. Those copies get copied. The tape spreads across Hollywood on bootleg VHS at a speed that people in 1995 had no framework to understand.
Because nothing had really gone viral before. Not like this. The internet existed, but it was not yet the place people used to share video. This was viral in the literal original sense. Person to person, dub to dub, tape to tape. The short eventually made its way onto the early internet as one of the first videos to spread widely online. People who claim to know say that one of the early copies was sent to George Clooney, though this has never been fully confirmed. What is confirmed is that Brian Boitano, the Olympic figure skater who appears briefly in the short, eventually got a copy, and he was apparently flattered by how he was depicted. Parker and Stone suddenly find themselves famous in a specific Hollywood way, where everyone in the industry knows your name, but you still do not have a deal. They meet executives, they take meetings, they pitch the animated series that would grow out of this short. Fox is the first network they approach. Fox passes. The specific reason Fox passes is that one of the characters Parker and Stone have developed is a talking piece of feces named Mr. Hanky. A network executive looks at this character and decides it cannot be put on television. Comedy Central, which is smaller and less cautious, takes a different view. They give Parker and Stone a deal to develop South Park as a series. The show premieres on August 13th, 1997, and becomes the fastest growing cable series in television history almost overnight. Now here is where the Tiger Woods disc comes back. The 1995 Spirit of Christmas short, Jesus vs. Santa, had been spreading on bootleg copies for 2 years before the show premiered. Once the show became a hit, the short became a genuine artifact. People wanted to see where it all started. The game developer behind Tiger Woods 99 for PlayStation apparently got hold of a copy and decided, for reasons that were either playful or completely ill-judged depending on how you look at it, to hide the entire short film inside the game's data. Not accessible from the game itself, hidden in the raw disk data in a file with a dummy name, the kind of file that a PlayStation would skip right over and a computer would not. The game was rated E for everyone. It was marketed to children. Parents bought it for their kids that Christmas. When those kids put the disc into a computer to access the game's soundtrack, some of them found the file. They played it. They discovered 2 minutes of Jesus and Santa Claus fighting each other in graphic animated violence, while 4 small children swore constantly in the background. Electronic Arts, which was distributing the game, recalled it in January 1999. The first 100,000 copies of the game were affected. It remains one of the stranger footnotes in video game history. A piece of South Park hidden inside a children's product, distributed by accident, discovered by the exact audience the show was never intended for. What the Spirit of Christmas shorts reveal about South Park that the show itself sometimes obscures is how fully formed the fundamental idea was from the very beginning. The format changed. The animation got better. The characters got names and histories and relationships. But the core engine of the thing, 4 kids in a snowy Colorado town, irreverent humor aimed at everything sacred, a moral at the end that may or may not be sincere, was present in that 1992 student film before Parker and Stone had any idea what they were building. The show people think of as having been invented is something that was actually discovered, slowly, through 2 shorts and several years of failing before the right executive saw the right tape at the right moment. Trey Parker's first film at the University of Colorado, made before he met Matt Stone, was called Giant Beavers of Southern Sri Lanka. It was a Godzilla spoof featuring a girl in a beaver costume attacking a model town. Parker later said that other students in the film program were furious when that film won a Student Academy Award, because students from serious animation schools had submitted technically superior work. Parker did not win because his film was technically impressive. He won because it was funny and strange and had an energy that more polished work did not have. That same energy is what made Brian Graydon want to pay for the Christmas card. It is what made those bootleg copies spread. It is what made Comedy Central take a chance on a show about a talking piece of feces. The 2 Spirit of Christmas shorts are not just historical curiosities. They are the actual argument that the show was always going to exist in some form, because the people making it had a specific and unusual way of seeing the world that was going to find an audience one way or another. The construction paper and the old camera were not limitations. They were the point. The crudeness was not something to apologize for or overcome. It was the whole thing. Most people who love South Park have never seen the 1992 short. Some have seen the 1995 one. Almost nobody outside of very specific corners of gaming history knows about the Tiger Woods recall, and almost nobody connects all 3 of these things into the single story they actually are. The story of a show that started with paper and scissors, spread through bootleg tapes, and ended up hidden
hidden on a children's golf game before it had even technically become itself yet. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That is the bottom of this particular layer of the iceberg, but just beneath it, there is something even more unusual. The machine that Parker and Stone built to actually make the show week after week. A machine that operates under conditions that should make it impossible to produce anything worth watching, and somehow keeps producing television that the entire world stops to talk about. That story is next, and it is stranger than the origin story in almost every way. Section 2. The 6-Day Machine. How South Park is actually made. 6 days. That is the number. From nothing. No idea, no script, no animation, no voices, to a finished 22-minute episode of television, broadcast to millions of people across the country. 6 days. Every single week for multiple weeks in a row, season after season, for almost 30 years. To understand why that number is insane, you need to know how other animated shows work. The Simpsons takes between 6 and 9 months to produce a single episode. Family Guy operates on a similar timeline. Most animated television, from the biggest networks to the smallest streaming services, works on a production cycle that is measured in months, not days. The reason is simple: animation is slow. Every frame has to be drawn or built or rendered. Every voice has to be recorded and matched to movement. Every scene has to be edited and scored and reviewed by multiple people before it goes anywhere near a broadcast. The normal process for making a cartoon is long because it has to be. South Park does it in 6 days, not because they found a shortcut, not because they have some secret technology nobody else knows about. They do it because Trey Parker and Matt Stone decided very early in the show's run that being fast was more important than being perfect, and they built an entire operation around that belief. The show runs on Autodesk Maya, a software program that lets the animators build the cutout paper look of the original shorts digitally, which means they can make changes to scenes much faster than traditional animation allows. But software is only part of it. The bigger part is the culture Parker and Stone created inside South Park Studios in Los Angeles. A culture where everything moves at a pace that, from the outside, looks like controlled chaos. The 2011 documentary 6 Days to Air showed the world what a single production week actually looks like. The film follows Parker and Stone as they return to the studio from New York, where they have just opened their Broadway musical, The Book of Mormon, to begin season 15 with essentially no idea what the first episode will be about. The cameras capture something that should not be possible to watch without feeling anxious on behalf of everyone involved. Parker paces in circles around the writer's room like an animal stuck in a small space, trying to find the idea that will become the episode. The room fills with suggestions. Most of them go nowhere. Some get explored for a few minutes before being quietly abandoned. The writers throw ideas out and wait to see if Parker reacts because Parker is the one who decides. Parker is always the one who decides. And when he is in the room with no idea and the clock is running, the energy in the building shifts into something close to dread. The documentary follows the production of an episode called Human Centipede, which became the season 15 premiere. What it shows is a week that operates in phases. The beginning of the week is almost entirely about writing and voice recording. Parker writes the script while simultaneously thinking about how it will be animated, which means he is essentially doing 2 jobs at once. He and Stone voice the majority of the male characters themselves, and the voice recording sessions, captured by the documentary's cameras, are full of laughter. They crack each other up constantly. The sound engineers have to edit out all the laughing between takes. The session for one episode can produce hours of raw audio that gets compressed into the roughly 22 minutes that actually makes it to air. While the writing and recording are happening, the animators are already beginning to build the episode's visual elements. They do not wait for the script to be finished. They cannot wait. If they wait for the script to be finished before they start, they will miss the broadcast. So they work from outlines, from rough descriptions, from whatever Parker can give them while he is still writing the rest of it. This means that sometimes the animators are building scenes for a script that does not yet fully exist, and they have to be prepared to tear those scenes apart and rebuild them when the writing catches up and turns out to be different from what they had been working toward. By the middle of the week, the building is running at full speed on multiple tracks at once. Writing is still happening, animation is happening, voice recording is happening. The show's executive producer, Ann Garofino, is on the phone with Comedy Central's Standards and Practices team, which is the department responsible for deciding what can and cannot be broadcast on television. Garofino's job in these calls is to describe what the episode is going to contain, often before it fully exists, and get clearance for the content. The documentary captures one of these conversations, and the contrast between the calm, professional way Garofino describes what sounds like completely outrageous material and the completely outrageous material itself is one of the stranger things you will ever watch about how television gets made. The final final days of the week are where the machine becomes truly difficult to believe. Parker is still writing, animators are finishing scenes, editors are cutting the episode together, sound is being mixed, music is being placed. The whole thing is moving simultaneously toward a fixed point. The moment the episode has to leave the building and be sent to Comedy Central in New York so it can air. The documentary shows Garofino and supervising producer Frank Agnone physically carrying the master tape to a nearby facility that sends it to the network via satellite. This happens on the day of broadcast, hours before the episode airs. Sometimes those hours are measured in single digits. Parker has said in interviews that he is almost always disappointed when an episode is finished. Not because the episodes are bad, most of them are not bad, but because the deadline arrives before he feels done. He has said there are episodes he could have worked on for several more weeks and improved significantly, but the broadcast slot does not move. The episode that exists on Wednesday night is the episode that was possible in 6 days, not the episode that would have been possible in 6 weeks. He makes peace with this every single week and has been making peace with it for the better part of 3 decades. The show has missed exactly one deadline in its entire run, season 17, 2013. The episode was called Goth Kids 3, Dawn of the Posers. A car accident near the South Park studios knocked out power to the building. The power outage forced the episode to be delayed and replaced with a rerun. Parker later admitted that they were probably going to miss that deadline regardless of the power going out. The episode was in trouble even before the lights went out. The power failure just made it official. In the context of a show that has produced hundreds of episodes across nearly 30 years of weekly production, one missed deadline due to a literal act of God is a record that most television productions could not come close to matching. The 6-day schedule exists for a reason beyond just the challenge of it. Parker and Stone have explained many times that the pressure is deliberate. Subjecting themselves to a 1-week deadline forces a kind of creative spontaneity that a longer timeline would kill. When you have 6 months to write an episode, you can second guess every decision 100 times. When you have 6 days, you commit to the first idea that works and you make it work. The impulsiveness that would be a weakness in a longer process becomes a strength in a shorter one.
The show moves fast because fast is what makes it funny. The jokes that land in a South Park episode are often the jokes that came out quickly before anyone had time to sand the edges off them. The other reason the schedule matters, the reason that separates South Park from every other animated show ever made, is that 6 days means the show can respond to the world in real time. Not approximately real time, actual real time. The season 4 episode Quintuplets 2000 referenced the United States government's raid on a house during the Elian Gonzalez case. The raid happened 4 days before the episode aired. 4 days. By the time any other animated show could have even begun pre-production on an episode about Elian Gonzalez, South Park had already aired it and moved on to the next thing. This is not a coincidence or a lucky break. It is the entire point of the machine Parker and Stone built. Best Friends Forever, which is covered in full later in this video, aired during the Terry Schiavo controversy, a political and medical crisis that was happening in real time while the episode was being made. The episode aired the night before Schiavo died. It won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program. Parker said the entire structure of the episode came to him in 30 minutes because the moral clarity was already there in the news story. He just had to find the South Park version of it. That kind of responsiveness is only possible because of the machine. You cannot respond to the world as it happens if your production pipeline takes 6 months. The season 7 finale, It's Christmas in Canada, aired with a reference to Saddam Hussein being found hiding in a hole in the ground by American soldiers. That discovery happened 3 days before the episode aired. 3 days from real-world event to animated satirical reference on national television. The show did not have to decide whether to include it or wait for a later episode. It just put it in because the timeline allowed it. There is a cost to all of this. The people who work at South Park Studios during production weeks are working extremely long hours under a level of pressure that is genuinely unusual, even by television standards. The documentary captures that clearly. The animators are anxious when the writer's room goes quiet because quiet means writing is not happening, which means the script they need to animate is not coming, which means their already impossible timeline is getting shorter. The relationship between the writing side and the animation side of the production is one of mutual dependence and mutual stress. Everyone needs everyone else to move faster than is comfortable, all week, every week, season after season. Parker himself has described the experience of writing under this kind of pressure as something that alternates between exhilarating and genuinely miserable. He eats large amounts of McDonald's food while writing, something the documentary captures, which feels like a very accurate portrait of someone who is functioning on deadline energy and stress rather than anything resembling a healthy creative process. And yet the show keeps coming. Week after week, the tape leaves the building. The episode airs. People
People watch it and talk about it, and then do the same thing the following Wednesday. During the time the 6 Days to Air documentary was filmed, the crew was making 7 episodes in a row, 7 consecutive weeks of this same cycle, without a break between them. Starting with season 17, they moved to making 10 episodes per season, which meant 10 consecutive weeks of the 6-day cycle. The endurance required to sustain that, year after year, is something the show rarely gets credit for simply because the episodes appear on screens and seem like they just exist. They do not just exist. They are pulled out of nothing in 6 days by a group of people who have committed to one of the strangest production schedules in the history of television, driven by 2 men who still, after all this time, find the pressure useful. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the 6-day machine is just the engine. What that engine produced, the actual content, the characters, the episodes that changed everything, is where the deeper part of the iceberg lives. And no single episode changed more about what the show was capable of than one that almost did not get made, over a storyline that Parker and Stone were not sure they were allowed to put on television. The episode that made one character into something completely different from what he had been before, and set the standard for everything that followed. Section 3, Scott Tenerman Must Die, the episode that changed everything. Season 5, Episode 4, July 11th, 2001. On IMDb, where millions of people rate television episodes on a scale of 1 to 10, Scott Tenerman Must Die sits at a 9.6. That is not just the highest rated episode of South Park, it is one of the highest rated individual television episodes of any show ever recorded on that site. Variety named it one of the best sitcom episodes ever made. The AV Club put it on their list of the best sitcom episodes since 1990. Rolling Stone called the central moment of the episode the second greatest moment in South Park history. Parker and Stone themselves named it one of their 10 favorite episodes they have ever made, twice, in separate interviews years apart. None of that tells you what the episode actually did. The plot starts simply. Cartman brags to Stan, Kyle, and Kenny that he has reached puberty before any of them. He is proud about this in the specific way Cartman is proud about everything, loudly, completely, without any awareness that he might be wrong. The other boys immediately explain that puberty means growing your own body hair, not buying someone else's. Cartman has bought pubic hair from a 9th grader named Scott Tenerman for $10, believing it counted. It does not count. He has been tricked. Cartman goes to Scott and asks for his money back. Scott refuses. Cartman tries several times to get the money back through various schemes. Each time, Scott outsmarts him and humiliates him further. Scott tricks Cartman out of an additional $6.12. Scott uses Cartman's own attempts against him. By the time Cartman has lost $16.12 total and been made to look stupid in front of the entire town on video, a video Scott shows publicly, of Cartman dancing and begging like a pig, something in Cartman shifts. He goes quiet. He starts planning. What Parker and Stone built in the second half of the episode is a slow reveal that the audience is being watched as closely as Cartman is watching Scott. Every move Cartman makes appears to fail. He trains a pony to attack Scott. The pony does not attack the right thing. He tries to get Radiohead, Scott's favorite band, to come to South Park by sending a fake letter saying a boy with cancer wants to meet them. He creates a chili cook-off called the Chili Con Carnival and invites Scott. He tells Stan and Kyle about his plan. Stan and Kyle, because they are Stan and Kyle, immediately go and warn Scott. Cartman loses again, or so it seems. The final scene of the episode takes place at the Chili Con Carnival. Scott has his own chili. Cartman has his. They eat each other's. Scott tells Cartman he put pubic hair in his chili. Cartman says he already knew that because he switched the bowls. Scott has been eating Chef's chili, not Cartman's. Scott asks what is in Cartman's chili then. Cartman explains. He has accounted for everything. He knew Stan and Kyle would warn Scott. He built that into the plan. The farmer whose property the pony was on, Mr. and Mrs. Tenerman, Scott's parents, were called by someone, came onto the property, and were shot by the farmer as trespassers. Their bodies were ground up and put into the chili. Scott Tenerman has just eaten his own parents. Radiohead then appears, because Cartman actually did arrange for them to come. They look at Scott crying in the field and call him a crybaby. They leave. The episode ends with Cartman tasting Scott's tears off his own finger and saying they are delicious. Kyle and Stan stand behind him, completely silent, realizing they are looking at something they do not have a name for. Parker and Stone have said clearly and on the record that this episode was made with one specific purpose, to show how evil Cartman actually was. Before this episode, Cartman was a bad kid, an annoying kid, a mean, selfish, bigoted kid. But he was a kid. The things he did were scaled to what an unpleasant child might do. true. After Scott Tenerman must die, he was something different. Parker used the phrase, the most evil kid in the world. That is not a description of a comic character. That is a description of something closer to a villain, except that the show never stopped letting you laugh at him, which made it stranger and more uncomfortable than a straightforward villain would have been. The episode changed the show structurally in a second way that Parker has talked about directly. Before this episode, South Park almost always ran multiple storylines in a single episode. A main story, a secondary story, sometimes a third thread that connected to the other two at the end. Scott Tenerman Must Die has none of that. There is one story, Cartman versus Scott Tenerman, from the first minute to the last. No B-plot, no relief valve, just the one thing all the way through. Parker said in an interview that watching how well this worked made him and Stone realize they had been overcomplicating their episodes. From that point forward, the writer's room started asking whether every episode really needed a second story, and more often than not, the answer was no. There is something else in the episode that only became fully clear 9 years later. In season 14, episode 6, titled 201, Scott Tenerman returns to South Park. He is now the leader of a group called the Ginger Separatist Movement. During the episode, he reveals something he discovered while researching his revenge on Cartman, something he found in Cartman's own background. Scott Tenerman's father was a man named Jack Tenerman who played for the Denver Broncos. Jack Tenerman had a relationship with Cartman's mother Leanne before the events of Scott Tenerman Must Die. Jack Tenerman was Cartman's biological father. This means that when Cartman arranged for Mr. and Mrs. Tenerman to be shot on that farm, he killed his own father. And then he fed his own father to his half-brother Scott at the ChiliCon Carnival. And then he tasted the tears of his half-brother and called them delicious. Cartman does not take this revelation the way anyone expects. When Scott tells him, Cartman begins crying. For a moment, it looks like genuine grief, the first real grief the show has ever given him. Then the camera stays on his face long enough to show what he is actually crying about. He is not crying because he killed his father. He is crying because his father was a ginger. That is the only part that upsets him. The murder, the chili, the half-brother, none of it registers as something to feel bad about. The ginger part does. Parker and Stone debated seriously whether to go through with the original ending of Scott Tenerman Must Die. The debate was specifically about whether it was acceptable to have an 8-year-old character orchestrate the deaths of two people and then serve them as food to their son. They decided to go forward with it on one condition. Cartman could not be the one who directly caused the deaths. The mechanism had to be indirect.
He arranges events. He sends people to the right location at the right time. The farmer does the shooting. This is a meaningful distinction to the writers and it holds up. What makes Cartman terrifying in this episode is not that he is physically dangerous, but that he is strategically patient and completely without limits when it comes to what he is willing to engineer. The title of the episode was almost Scott Tenerman Must Die. Parker changed it because Tenerman sounded funnier. The pubic hair in the episode was real. It was scanned from the neck hair of Adrian Beard, the show's lead storyboarder. Radiohead agreed to appear in the episode and voice themselves. Stone was in the recording booth directing Tom York, Radiohead's singer, and found himself in the position of telling one of the most emotionally expressive musicians alive to put more feeling into his delivery. Stone described this as deeply strange. Kurt Loder, a longtime MTV host, also appeared in the episode playing himself as an interviewer. The episode originally aired without a visible ghost of Kenny, who dies in this episode from laughing too hard at the video of Cartman dancing. The ghost was added in the rerun that aired the following Saturday. The episode sits at the center of everything South Park became afterward. The show had always been willing to go to uncomfortable places. It had always been willing to be darker than the audience expected, but Scott Tenerman Must Die established that there was no floor, that the show could go as far as the story required it to go, and the audience would follow because the storytelling was precise enough to make even something this dark feel earned rather than random. It is not shocking for the sake of being shocking. Every step in the escalation is logical. Every moment of apparent failure on Cartman's part turns out to be a piece of a plan the audience did not know was there. The episode is, structurally, closer to a thriller than a comedy. The comedy is in the details. The engine underneath is pure long-game revenge storytelling. That engine, Cartman's specific brand of patient, total, consequence-free cruelty, became the most interesting creative tool the show had. Almost every great Cartman episode afterward is built on the same foundation this one laid. He wants something. He plans. Everyone thinks he has failed. He has not failed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But Cartman, as disturbing as he is, was not the show's most explosive real-world problem. The most explosive real-world problems came from outside the show entirely. From a religion that does not take kindly to being mocked. From a voice actor who may or may not have actually chosen to leave,
and from a superstar whose name the show kept saying out loud in ways that allegedly cost a network executive more than one difficult phone call. That story involves a closet, a stroke, and a soul singer whose departure from South Park turns out to have been arranged by other people entirely. Section 4. The Scientology War. Isaac Hayes, Tom Cruise, and the Real Story. November 16th, 2005. Season 9, Episode 12. Trapped in the Closet. The episode follows Stan Marsh, who wanders into a Scientology center out of curiosity, takes a personality test, and scores so unusually high that the Scientology leaders become convinced he is the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, the man who founded Scientology. Word spreads. Tom Cruise shows up at Stan's house to get approval from the reincarnated founder. Stan, being Stan, tells Tom Cruise honestly that he thinks Cruise is a good actor, but not the greatest actor he has ever seen. Cruise cannot handle this. He walks into Stan's bedroom closet and refuses to come out. The rest of the episode involves various characters. John Travolta, R. Kelly, trying to coax Cruise out of the closet while he refuses. The episode also dedicates a significant portion of its runtime to explaining, in plain detail, what Scientologists actually believe about the history of humanity and the universe. At the end of the episode, a title card appears on screen that reads, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." The closing credits list every single person who worked on the episode. Cast, crew, writers, everyone. Under the name John Smith or Jane Smith. Every person. The joke being that Scientology was so well known for suing people who said things they did not like that the entire production team had legally covered themselves by becoming impossible to identify. Parker and Stone had been aware of Scientology as a target for years before this episode aired. They had specifically avoided it out of loyalty to Isaac Hayes, who had voiced the character Chef since the show's very first episode in 1997. Hayes was a practicing Scientologist, and Parker and Stone respected him enough not to go after his religion while he was part of the cast. What changed their minds, according to people close to the production, was a conversation with Penn Jillette, the magician and television personality. Jillette told Parker and Stone that the network Showtime had refused to allow his show Penn and Teller Bullshit to do an episode critical of Scientology because the organization was so known for taking legal action against its critics. Parker and Stone treated this as a direct challenge. Their network, Comedy Central, was more willing. They made the episode. The episode aired on November 16th, 2005, and the reaction inside Scientology was immediate. Stone has described what happened in the days after the episode went out. Hayes came to meet with Stone, and it was clear from the conversation that someone had sent Hayes to ask them to pull the episode. It had already aired, so pulling it was not possible, but the intention was clear. Stone and Parker had deliberately not told Hayes the episode was coming, specifically so Hayes could honestly say he had no advance knowledge of it. They wanted to protect him from being held responsible by anyone in Scientology who might ask whether he had known. 4 months passed. Then, on March 13th, 2006, a press release went out under Isaac Hayes' name announcing that he was leaving South Park. The press release said he was departing because of the show's intolerance and bigotry toward religious beliefs. It did not name Scientology specifically, but nobody reading it had any doubt what it was referring to. Parker and Stone responded publicly and directly. Stone pointed out that Hayes had been part of the show for nearly a decade, while South Park mocked Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Mormonism, and essentially every other belief system on Earth, and that no complaint had ever come from him during any of that time. Stone said, "We never heard a peep out of Isaac in any way until we did Scientology." He said that Hayes appeared to be applying a different standard to his own religion than to everyone else's, and that this was exactly the kind of thinking the show existed to challenge. But the public version of events was not the full story. Hayes' son, Isaac Hayes III, eventually spoke publicly about what actually happened. His account is the one that changes everything. In January 2006, 2 months before the press release went out, Isaac Hayes suffered a severe stroke. The stroke left him unable to speak normally. He was relearning basic functions. He was in no condition, his son said, to make decisions about his career or to compose a press release or to authorize anyone to speak on his behalf. Everyone around Hayes at that time, according to his son, was deeply involved in Scientology. His assistants, the people managing his daily life, the core group surrounding him during his recovery. Isaac Hayes III's conclusion was direct. His father did not quit South Park. Someone else quit South Park for him, using his name, while he was recovering from a stroke and could not speak for himself. Parker and Stone have said they suspected something was wrong from the moment the press release appeared. Parker said they knew in their hearts there was something more going on. But the press release was out, and Hayes was not in a position to publicly contradict it, and the story became the story. Hayes had quit over Scientology. That was the version that circulated everywhere. Comedy Central, in the weeks after the press release, pulled a scheduled rerun of Trapped in the Closet. The official explanation from Comedy Central was that removing the rerun was a tribute to Hayes following his departure. Multiple media outlets reported a different explanation, that Tom Cruise had threatened to refuse to do press for Mission Impossible 3, which was being distributed by Paramount Pictures, which was owned by Viacom, which also owned Comedy Central. The claim was that Cruise had enough leverage over Viacom through the film promotion to get the rerun pulled. Comedy Central denied this. Cruise's representatives denied this. Cruise himself said he would not dignify the question by addressing it directly. The rerun stayed pulled regardless of what the official explanation was. Parker and Stone issued a public statement in response to the whole situation. The statement read, "So, Scientology, you may have won this battle, but the million-year war for Earth has just begun." The reference to a million years was a direct joke aimed at Scientology's own internal documents, which describe events taking place across enormous spans of time. The statement also included several other references that only someone familiar with Scientology's beliefs would fully understand. It was not a measured corporate response. It was Parker and Stone doing exactly what they always do.
When season 10 began in 2006, the show's response to Hayes' departure was the episode The Return of Chef. In it, Chef comes back to South Park, but he has been changed. He has joined a group called the Super Adventure Club and has been, in the show's words, brainwashed. He begins saying things that are completely out of character. He behaves in ways that horrify his friends. He dies in the episode, falling off a bridge, being impaled, catching fire, and then being attacked by a mountain lion and a bear, in a sequence of escalating violence that was clearly designed to be read as commentary on how the show felt about the circumstances surrounding Hayes' exit. At Chef's funeral, Kyle says, "We should not be mad at Chef for leaving us. We should be mad at that fruity little club for scrambling his brains." The voice of Chef in The Return of Chef was assembled from old recordings of Hayes from previous episodes. Lines were cut together and rearranged to make Chef say things Hayes had never actually said in that combination. Hayes had died nearly 2 years after the episode aired. He passed away in August 2008, following the effects of the stroke he had suffered in January 2006. His grave bears an image of the character he voiced for nearly a decade on a show he may never have actually chosen to leave. The episode Trapped in the Closet itself has a complicated status in the years since. Unlike the Muhammad episodes covered later in this video, Trapped in the Closet is currently available to stream on Max. It was pulled from rotation for a period and was unavailable for some time, but it eventually returned to streaming. 2 other episodes featuring Tom Cruise as a significant character, episodes from season 10, remain completely unavailable on any streaming platform and cannot be purchased digitally anywhere. They exist only on the physical DVD and Blu-ray box sets of the season. The reasons for their unavailability have never been officially explained. What the Scientology story reveals about South Park is something the show had been signaling since its earliest episodes, but had never demonstrated quite so clearly. The show was genuinely willing to absorb real-world consequences for the things it said. Not just criticism, not just angry letters, actual consequences. A cast member gone, a rerun pulled, a film star allegedly making phone calls to the parent company. Parker and Stone did not change course. They made an episode killing Chef. They released a statement mocking Scientology directly. They kept going. The show's willingness to absorb consequences without backing down is one of the things that separates it from most television. Most shows, when they discover that a specific target has real power to make their lives difficult, quietly stop pointing at that target. South Park kept pointing, and the Scientology situation, as messy and complicated and genuinely sad as it was for Isaac Hayes, made clear to everyone watching that Parker and Stone were not performing bravery. They were just actually that way. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if Scientology produced the messiest real-world fallout the show had ever faced up to that point, a different controversy, one that began with a Danish newspaper and ended with death threats against the creators themselves, would eventually make the Scientology situation look almost manageable by comparison. That story involves a blank screen, a bleeped-out speech, and 5 episodes that you currently cannot watch legally anywhere in the world. Section 5. The Muhammad Problem, Comedy Central, Censorship, and the Death Threats. There are 5 episodes of South Park you cannot legally watch anywhere right now. Not on Max, not on the South Park website, not on any streaming service that carries the show, not available for digital purchase, not available for digital rental. They exist on the physical DVD and Blu-ray box sets of their respective seasons, and that is the only legal way to see them. 5 episodes out of more than 300. All 5 involve the
same thing. All 5 involve showing, or attempting to show, or even just discussing the possibility of showing, the Prophet Muhammad, the most important figure in the religion of Islam. To understand how 5 episodes of one of the most popular animated shows in television history ended up permanently removed from circulation, you need to start not with South Park, but with a Danish newspaper. In 2005, a newspaper in Denmark called Jyllands-Posten published a series of cartoon drawings depicting the Prophet Muhammad. In Islam, depicting the Prophet in any visual form is considered deeply offensive, and the publication of these cartoons set off a wave of protests, riots, and violence across the world. Buildings were attacked, people died. The cartoons became a global news story about the limits of free expression and the consequences of offending deeply held religious beliefs. The debate was everywhere, and South Park, a show built on the idea that nothing is too sacred to be mocked, could not ignore it. In 2006, season 10 opened with a 2-part episode called Cartoon Wars. The plot involved the animated show Family Guy planning to air an episode that would depict Muhammad. The people of South Park panic, fearing violent reactions similar to what happened after the Danish cartoons. Cartman, who hates Family Guy, tries to get Fox to pull the episode under the cover of not wanting to cause violence, while Kyle argues that censoring yourself because you are afraid of violent reactions is itself a form of surrender. The episode was directly about the Danish cartoon controversy, about free speech, and about Comedy Central's own reluctance to show Muhammad on their network. In the fictional version of the episode, Muhammad appeared on screen uncensored. In the version that actually aired on Comedy Central, the scene was replaced with a title card that read, "Comedy Central has refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on their network." Parker and Stone had not put that title card there. Comedy Central had. The network made the decision to censor the image without the creators' agreement, and then broadcast the episode with their own title card explaining what they had done. Parker and Stone were furious. They went public with their criticism of the network's decision. They pointed out that the same network allowed them to depict Jesus Christ in ways that many Christians found deeply offensive, and that applying a different standard to Muhammad was itself a statement, one that suggested violent threats were an effective way to change what South Park would and would not show. Viacom president Doug Herzog acknowledged the decision was difficult and said he believed, or hoped, it would come to be seen as an overreaction. As Parker later said, history proved him at least partially wrong. 4 years passed, the show kept going. Then in 2010, South Park reached its 200th episode. Parker and Stone decided to mark the occasion with something ambitious. The episode titled 200 brought back virtually every celebrity and group the show had ever mocked. All of them now united around a single goal. They want to get their hands on Muhammad, because Muhammad has a power nobody else has. He cannot be depicted. He cannot be shown. He cannot be made fun of. In a world where South Park makes fun of everything and everyone, Muhammad's untouchable status is itself the joke, and the episode uses that joke to say something direct about the way threats of violence had effectively given one religious figure a protection that no other religious figure had. The episode ended on a cliffhanger. Part 2, titled 201, aired the following week. Before it aired, a group called Revolution Muslim posted a message online. The message warned Parker and Stone that they were risking being killed for their depiction of Muhammad. The message included the address of Comedy Central's offices. It referenced the murder of Theo van Gogh, a filmmaker who had been killed in the Netherlands in 2004 after making a film critical of the treatment of women in Islam. The post stopped short of a direct threat, but the message was clear enough that news organizations covered it as a threat. Law enforcement was notified, and Comedy Central made decisions accordingly. When 201 aired, it was unlike anything the show had produced before in terms of how heavily it had been altered before broadcast. Muhammad appeared in every scene with a black box labeled "censored" covering him completely, just as in the Cartoon Wars episodes 4 years earlier. But Comedy Central went further this time. At the end of the episode, Kyle delivers a speech. In the version Parker and Stone wrote, the speech is about the central argument of the entire 2-part story, about fear, and about what happens to free expression when violent threats are allowed to determine what can and cannot be said. The speech had nothing to do with Muhammad directly. It was the moral of the story, the kind of statement South Park ends its best episodes with. Comedy Central bleeped the entire speech, every word of it. Not just references to Muhammad, the whole thing. The episode aired with Kyle's concluding argument completely removed from the audience's hearing, replaced with a continuous bleep that ran for the duration of the speech. Parker was openly angry about this in interviews afterward. He said he thought the 2 episodes were genuinely good television, and that the network's decision to bleep Kyle's speech specifically, a speech that was not about Muhammad, made the censorship worse than it would have been if they had simply pulled the episodes entirely. The speech was about the exact thing happening to the speech speech while it was being delivered. The network had, without apparently intending to, made the most direct possible argument for the show's position by censoring the argument against censorship. The episodes 200 and 201 have never been made legally available on any platform since their original broadcast. They are the only South Park episodes that were never made available on the show's own website or streaming services. 3 other episodes, Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartoon Wars Part 2, and Super Best Friends, an earlier episode that had originally aired without controversy and had shown Muhammad briefly alongside other religious figures, were also removed from all platforms following the reaction to 200 and 201. Super Best Friends had aired without any significant complaint when it first broadcast. It was pulled retroactively years later because it contained a brief visual of Muhammad, and after 200 and 201, any episode with any such depiction was treated the same way regardless of when it had originally aired. The 5 banned episodes can be watched on physical disc. The DVD and Blu-ray box sets that were manufactured and sold before the bans went into effect contain the episodes intact, but they cannot be bought digitally, cannot be streamed, and are not available on any service that currently carries South Park's catalog. Parker and Stone have not, since 200 and 201, attempted to depict Muhammad again in any direct way. The controversy produced by those 2 episodes and the real-world threat environment around them represented something different from the Scientology situation or any other controversy the show had been involved in. The Scientology fallout was messy and personal. The Muhammad situation involved credible threats of deadly violence against the creators themselves. The show continued making television, but the subject of Muhammad has remained, in practice, off the table in a way that almost nothing else has been. What the whole sequence of events demonstrated, from Cartoon Wars in 2006 through the banning of 5 episodes in 2010, is that South Park's stated position of treating every religion and every group the same way ran into a hard limit it had not fully anticipated. Parker and Stone have said many times that their standard is that either everything is acceptable to mock or nothing is. Comedy Central's actions over these years made clear that the network did not fully share that standard, at least not when the alternative was credible threats of violence. Whether that makes Comedy Central cowards or reasonable people responding to a genuinely dangerous situation is a question the show itself raised and never fully answered, because the show's own creators were living inside the situation rather than observing it from a safe distance. The 5 episodes sit on physical discs in the collections of fans who bought them before the bans. Everywhere else, those episodes simply do not exist in any form the public can access. It is the clearest example in the show's history of the world actually pushing back hard enough to change what South Park could do, not by arguing against it, not by writing angry letters, but by making the consequences of continuing too real to ignore. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That is the deepest the censorship story goes, but South Park's collisions with the real world were not always this dark. Sometimes the real world handed the show something it could not have written better itself: a death, a controversy, a political crisis, and the machine responded in 6 days with something that ended up winning television's highest honor. That story involves a video game, a vegetable, and an episode that aired 12 hours before someone died. Section 6. Best Friends Forever. The episode that aired 12 hours before someone died. March 30th, 2005. Trey Parker sat down to write an episode of South Park and had the entire structure figured out in 30 minutes. He has said this himself in the DVD commentary for the episode. 30 minutes. For a man who spends most of his writing weeks pacing in circles and eating McDonald's at 2 in the morning trying to find the story, 30 minutes is not a normal experience. Parker described it as something that almost never happens. The reason it happened so fast was that the moral of the episode was already sitting right there in the news, fully formed, waiting for him to pick it up. The Terry Schiavo case had been building as a news story for years, but in the weeks leading up to March 2005, it had become, in Parker and Stone's words, the biggest news story since the September 11th attacks. Terry Schiavo was a woman in Florida who had been in what doctors called a persistent vegetative state since 1990, 15 years of being kept alive by a feeding tube, with no sign of awareness or recovery. Her husband wanted the tube removed. Her parents did not. The legal battle between them had been going on for years. In March 2005, it reached its peak. A judge ordered the feeding tube removed. Congress passed emergency legislation specifically about Schiavo's case in an attempt to override the judge. President George W. Bush signed that legislation in the middle of the night, and the story was on every television channel every hour of every day. Protesters gathered outside the hospice where Schiavo was being cared for. People were arrested trying to bring her food and water. Politicians on both sides made speeches. The media covered every development as though it were a national emergency, which in some ways it had become. Parker looked at all of this and had the structure of his episode in 30 minutes. The episode is called Best Friends Forever, Season 9, Episode 4. In it,
Kenny is the first person in South Park to get a new PlayStation Portable, the handheld gaming device Sony had released in North America on March 24th, 2005, 6 days before the episode aired. Kenny becomes completely absorbed in a game called Heaven vs. Hell. He reaches the highest level of the game. While celebrating outside, distracted by the game, he is run over by an ice cream van driven by someone else who is also playing the game and has just reached level 4. Kenny dies, which is not unusual for South Park. What is unusual is what happens next. It turns out that Heaven created the PlayStation Portable specifically as a test. They needed to find the greatest player of the game in the world because that person would serve as their military commander in the coming battle between the armies of Heaven and Hell. Kenny, it turns out, is their person. He is recruited to lead Heaven's forces. The angels describe him as their Keanu Reeves, a reference to Reeves playing heroes in impossible situations in films like The Matrix and Constantine. The problem is that a doctor manages to bring Kenny back to life before he can fulfill his role in Heaven. Because he was dead for so long, Kenny returns in a permanent vegetative state. He cannot speak, he cannot communicate. He is alive in the technical sense and nothing else. The doctors say there is no chance of recovery. This is where the episode becomes the Terry Schiavo case in cartoon form. Cartman, who was unable to get his own PlayStation Portable because he arrived at the store too late, learns that Kenny's will leaves him the device. Cartman suddenly becomes Kenny's most passionate advocate for removing life support, claiming the right to make medical decisions on Kenny's behalf based on a BFF, Best Friends Forever, necklace the two of them share. He launches a public campaign. He gets lawyers involved. He gets the case onto the news. He frames himself as honoring Kenny's wishes while being entirely motivated by wanting the gaming device. Stan and Kyle, convinced that Kenny would want to live, fight to keep him on life support. They put Kenny on the news themselves to generate public sympathy. Both sides are now using Kenny's body as a prop in a public argument, displaying him on national television to gather supporters for their position. Meanwhile, in Heaven, the angels are running out of time. Hell's army is enormous. Heaven is badly outnumbered. They need Kenny back. They begin working to influence events on Earth to ensure Kenny's feeding tube gets removed so he can return and lead their forces. Hell's army, wanting Kenny kept away from Heaven, begins working to ensure Kenny stays alive. The forces of Hell, the episode makes clear, achieve this by doing what they always do, by working through the Republican Party, whose members rally to keep Kenny alive. This is the show being equally critical of both sides, which it is very carefully throughout the entire episode. The episode ends when the missing final page of Kenny's will is found. Kenny's written wish, if he is ever in a vegetative state, is simple and direct. Please, for the love of God, do not ever show me in that condition on national television. Not a position on whether the tube should be removed or left in. Not a statement about right to life or right to die. Just a clear statement that whatever happens, he does not want to be turned into a spectacle. He does not want his body used as a prop in an argument. He does not want strangers on television crying about him while politicians make speeches using his name. The tube is removed. Kenny dies. Heaven wins. The episode won the 2005 Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. This was the first Emmy South Park had ever won. The show had been nominated 4 times before without winning. In 2005, it beat every other animated program in its category, including The Simpsons, which had won the award multiple times previously. South Park also became the first cable television series to win the Emmy in that category. Previous winners had all been on broadcast networks. The win was significant enough that it changed how the television industry talked about South Park. Before the Emmy, the show was often discussed primarily in terms of its controversy. After it, the conversation began to include the word serious more regularly. Terry Schiavo died on March 31st, 2005. The episode had aired on March 30th, 2005. Less than 12 hours passed between the broadcast of an episode about a woman in a vegetative state and the death of the actual woman in a vegetative state the episode was about. Schiavo had been alive when Parker wrote the episode. She had been alive when it was animated and recorded and sent to Comedy Central. She was alive when it aired. She died the following morning. Parker and Stone have addressed this in the DVD commentary. They called Best Friends Forever a very last-minute episode, one that Parker and Stone built from nothing in a compressed timeline even by South Park standards because the Schiavo case had moved so fast, and they felt they needed to respond
to it. The episode had originally been planned as a two-part story. After Sciavo died, Parker and Stone felt that doing a second part would be wrong. They could not continue making comedy about a situation that had just ended in a real person's death. The two-part plan was abandoned. The single episode stood on its own. The PlayStation Portable had been released in North America 6 days before the episode aired. The show had obtained and incorporated a brand new consumer product into a full episode within days of that product going on sale. This is another example of the 6-day machine producing things that should not be possible. Not just topical humor, but specific current product references that would have been impossible for any other animated show on a normal production schedule to include. The episode's moral, that both sides of a painful private situation were wrong for turning it into a public spectacle, was the most clearly stated political position South Park had taken up to that point in its run. The show did not argue that the feeding tube should have stayed in. It did not argue that it should have been removed. It argued that neither side had any business making the decision a national television event, and that the person whose life was actually at stake was the only one whose voice had never really been heard in any of it. This is South Park at the thing it does best, finding the version of a real story that cuts through the noise of how the public argument is being framed and says something simpler and more honest than anyone involved in the actual debate has managed to say. The Sciavo case was presented everywhere as a choice between two positions. The episode said it was actually a story about what people do to other people when a private tragedy becomes a public argument. Kenny's final wish was not a position on life and death. It was a statement about dignity. The episode airs. 12 hours pass. Terry Sciavo dies. An Emmy sits on a shelf somewhere at South Park Studios. The machine built to respond to the world in 6 days had, in this case, responded to something while it was still happening and produced the definitive artistic statement about it before the story even ended. That is a strange thing to have done. It is also, when you look at what the episode actually says, an unusually kind thing, far kinder than the show usually gets credit for being. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But kindness was not the defining quality of the person behind the female voices in every episode up to season 3. That person's story is one of the least discussed and most quietly heartbreaking chapters in the show's history. A woman whose voice was in millions of living rooms every week, whose name almost nobody knew, and whose death changed the show in ways that took years to fully understand. Section 7. Mary Kay Bergman, the voice nobody knew they were hearing. If you watched South Park during its first 3 seasons and you were paying close attention to the female characters, you might have noticed something unusual. Leanne Cartman, Eric's mother, spoke in a warm, sweet voice that sounded like a 1950s television housewife. Sheila Broflovsky, Kyle's mom, had a thick New York accent and a specific habit of saying what when she got flustered. Shelley Marsh, Stan's older sister, had a lisp that made her sound permanently annoyed. Sharon Marsh, Stan's mother, was calm and measured. Carol McCormick, Kenny's mother, cried constantly. Wendy Testaberger, the most put-together kid in the class, sounded like she was trying very hard to be taken seriously. Principal Victoria had authority in her voice. Ms. Crabtree, the school bus driver, sounded like a drill sergeant who had given up on being kind to anyone. Every single one of those voices came from the same person. Her name was Mary Kay Bergman. She voiced nearly every female character on South Park from the show's very first episode in 1997 until her death in 1999. The majority of people who watched the show during those seasons had no idea she existed because she was not listed in the credits under her real name. She was credited as Shannon Cassidy, a made-up name taken from 2 celebrities, Shannon Doherty and David Cassidy, because she was also the official voice of Snow White for the Walt Disney Company, and she did not want her association with an extremely adult and offensive cartoon to create problems with her Disney work. She later described the decision to be anonymous as sensible at the time, because none of them knew the show would become what it became. Once it did become a hit, she said, Shannon Cassidy was getting mail like Santa Claus, and they gradually shifted to using her real name. Bergman was born in Los Angeles on June 5th, 1961. She grew up in a neighborhood close to the home of Adriana Caselotti, the original voice actress who had played Snow White in Disney's 1937 animated film. As a child, Bergman would eventually grow up to replace Caselotti as Disney's official Snow White for recordings and theme park appearances. A fact that carries a certain strange weight given how close she had lived to the woman she would eventually succeed. She was a self-described fan of Disney and Star Trek from a young age, and she and her mother had actually written written letters to NBC as a child, trying to keep the original Star Trek series on the air for a third season. She trained as a theater actress, studied at UCLA, and spent years struggling to find consistent work before building a career as a voice actress. By the time she auditioned for South Park in 1997, she had already done work on Disney films, was the voice of Daphne Blake in several Scooby-Doo productions, and had voiced characters in dozens of television commercials. She was, within the relatively small world of voice acting, a genuinely respected and accomplished professional. The audition for South Park happened because Parker and Stone were unhappy with the actress who had voiced the female characters in the show's original unaired pilot. That actress, Carrie Turner, had recorded the initial versions of Wendy Testaberger and Leanne Cartman, but when Parker and Stone decided to recast, they held an open audition in Los Angeles. Bergman showed up and did something the other actresses did not do. She did not just read the lines she had been given, she brought ideas. She suggested that Leanne Cartman should sound like a mother from a 1950s television sitcom. Sweet, soft, slightly unreal in her cheerfulness. She suggested that Sheila Broflovsky should have a specific verbal tick, the what exclamation that became one of the character's most recognizable qualities. She suggested that Shelley Marsh should have a lisp. Parker and Stone had not thought of any of these things. They cast her immediately and gave her essentially every female character in the show. Her range was extraordinary by any measure. She was not doing one voice and adjusting it slightly for different characters. She was building completely separate vocal identities for each of them. Different accents, different rhythms, different emotional registers. The voice she used for Leanne Cartman was based on a 1950s housewife archetype. The voice for Sheila Broflovsky was based on her own aunt from New York. The voice for Ms. Crabtree was a drill sergeant. The voice for Carol McCormick, Kenny's perpetually weeping mother, was based on her impression of Bill Clinton. That last one is a fact that, once you know it, makes Kenny's mother's voice impossible to hear the same way again. Outside of South Park, Bergman was working constantly. She was voicing Snow White for Disney. She was voicing Daphne Blake in Scooby-Doo productions. She provided a voice for the character Jessie in Toy Story 2, specifically the yodeling and the television voice of the character as heard in old episodes of Woody's Roundup within the film. She appeared in JJ the Jet Plane. She contributed to the Weird Al Yankovic song Pretty Fly for a Rabbi. She voiced characters across dozens of other productions simultaneously. She was, by every professional measure, at the height of what her career could produce. In private, she was suffering in ways that nobody around her knew about. Bergman had been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. The diagnosis came from her doctor and was determined to be the result of severe stress. The condition had begun producing physical symptoms: insomnia, body pain, nausea. She was afraid, she told her husband in private, that she was losing her abilities. She believed that the qualities that made her voice work special were going to leave her, and that when they did, her career would end. She had built her entire professional life around her voice, and the fear that her voice would somehow fail her had become something she could not manage. She kept all of this completely hidden from everyone outside her marriage. Her colleagues did not know, her friends did not know, her family did not know. She went to work and performed and seemed, to everyone who saw her, to be the person she had always been. On the morning of November 11th, 1999, Bergman participated in a radio program celebrating Disneyland's 45th anniversary. She performed the voice of Snow White for a radio commercial that morning, the same voice she had been performing for a decade, the same warm and precise sound that had made her Disney's choice to succeed the original actress. She did the work. She finished the session. She went home. Her husband, Dino Andrade, returned to their home in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Venice that evening with a friend. He found that Bergman had died by suicide. She was 38 years old. Andrade later established the Mary Kay Bergman Memorial Fund, which contributed money to the Suicide Prevention Center at the D.D. Hirsch Community Mental Health Center in Los Angeles. The fund raised thousands of dollars in her memory. Parker and Stone were, in their own words, too distraught to issue a statement immediately after her death. When they did speak publicly, at the Paley Center for Media in March 2000, they said that they had known immediately there was no single person who could replace what Bergman had done. Her range was too wide. The number of distinct characters she had been voicing simultaneously was too large. It would take multiple talented voice actresses working together, they said, to cover the roles that one woman had held alone. 2 episodes of South Park were dedicated to her memory. The first was Starvin' Marvin in Space, which became the first episode to air after her death on November 17th, 1999, 6 days after she died. The second was Mr. Hankey's Christmas Classics, which had been recorded before her death and featured pre-recorded audio of Bergman's voice for the last time. The Christmas episode contained a musical sequence at the end, in which the characters she had voiced appeared during the line, "Faithful friends who are dear to us," and her most prominent characters joined Stan and Kyle during the line, "Gather near us once more." The episode was dedicated to her in the credits. Because the show was in the middle of season 3 when she died, some episodes that had already been recorded with her voice continued to air in the weeks following her death. Voice actress Eliza Schneider was brought in and made her first appearance as Sharon Marsh, and Carol McCormick later in season 3. The rest of Bergman's characters did not reappear until season 4, when Schneider and Mona Marshall between them took on the full range of roles Bergman had previously handled alone. Schneider stayed with the show through season 7. April Stewart joined the cast in season 8 and continues to voice the female characters today alongside Marshall. One additional detail that is not widely known: Bergman had been considered to perform the song "Blame Canada" at the 72nd Academy Awards ceremony in 2000. The song had been nominated for the Oscar for Best Original Song from the South Park film, South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. After Bergman's death, the song was performed at the ceremony by Robin Williams as a tribute to her. The song lost the Oscar to Phil Collins and his song "You'll Be in My Heart" from Disney's Tarzan. The irony of losing an Oscar to a Disney song when Bergman herself had been Disney's official Snow White is the kind of coincidence that does not feel like a coincidence. Her grave at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills is engraved with images of 3 of the characters she voiced: Leanne Cartman, Sheila Broflovsky, and Wendy Testaberger. The characters are on her gravestone because those characters were, in a real sense, part of what she left behind. Millions of people heard her voice every week for 3 seasons without knowing her name. The show she helped build into what it became went on without her, carried by the people who came after. But the specific textures she invented for those characters, the 1950s sweetness of Leanne, the New York intensity of Sheila, the lisp that makes Shelley sound so perpetually put upon, those did not disappear when she did. They stayed because the people who took over the roles kept what she had created. The voice nobody knew they were hearing shaped the sound of the show in ways that outlasted the person producing it. Bergman's story is one of the quieter tragedies in South Park's history, personal, private, and largely unknown to the audience that benefited most from her work. The show's other confrontations with the real world have mostly been loud ones: controversies, bans, threats, resignations. But sometimes the most significant things that happened to the show happened without anyone outside a small circle knowing about them at all. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What came next in the show's history was the opposite of quiet. It was a confrontation with an entire country, executed by an entire government, that wiped every trace of South Park from a population of over 1 billion people within days of a single episode airing. That story involves a work camp, a cartoon bear, a mouse who represents the most powerful entertainment company on Earth, and a mock apology that became one of the most shared statements Parker and Stone ever released. Section 8. Banned in China, the country that erased them. October 2nd, 2019, Season 23, Episode 2. A South Park episode aired on a Wednesday night, and by the following Monday, every single trace of the show had been removed from the internet inside a country of over 1 billion people. Not some episodes, not certain clips, everything. Every episode that had ever been uploaded, every clip that had ever been shared, every discussion thread, every fan page, every mention of the show's name on the country's biggest social media platforms, gone, wiped. As if South Park had never existed inside those borders at all. The country was China. The episode was called Banned in China, and the sequence of events it set off in the week following its broadcast represents one of the most direct and dramatic real-world consequences a television episode has ever produced. To understand what Banned in China did, you need to understand what it was about. The episode runs 2 storylines at the same time, and both of them are about the same thing: what happens to people and their work when they decide that access to the Chinese market is more important than saying what they actually think. The first storyline follows Randy Marsh, who travels to China to expand his marijuana business, Tegrity Farms. Randy's plan is straightforward. China has over 1 billion potential customers, and he wants to sell them his product. The plan falls apart immediately. Randy is arrested at the border when marijuana is discovered in his luggage, which he apparently did not anticipate would be a problem despite marijuana being illegal in China. He is sent to a labor camp. The labor camp is depicted in ways that directly reference the camps in Xinjiang province that the Chinese government had been using to hold large numbers of Muslim citizens for what the government called re-education. Inside the camp, Randy encounters two other prisoners, Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. The Winnie the Pooh detail requires a small amount of explanation. Several years before this episode aired, people on Chinese social media had begun sharing images that compared the physical appearance of Chinese President Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh, the round-faced cartoon bear created by A.A. Milne. The comparison spread widely enough that Chinese censors began removing Winnie the Pooh imagery from Chinese social media platforms. By 2018, the 2018 film Christopher Robin, which featured Winnie the Pooh as a central character, had not been given approval to release in Chinese cinemas, and many observers connected the denial directly to the memes comparing the bear to Xi Jinping. In the episode, Piglet directly acknowledges this, saying, "Some people said Pooh looked like the Chinese president, so we are illegal in China now." The second storyline follows Stan, whose metal band Crimson Dawn becomes popular enough to attract the attention of a music producer who wants to make a film about the band. The producer explains immediately what making a film for Chinese distribution requires. The film cannot mention the Dalai Lama, who is the spiritual leader of Tibet and deeply unpopular with the Chinese government. It cannot depict homosexuality. It cannot feature organ transplants. It cannot show Winnie the Pooh. As the filming process continues, Chinese government officials appear on set to personally review and approve every scene before it can be filmed. Stan finds himself unable to write a single line of script without a Chinese censor standing behind him, erasing anything that fails to meet the government's standards. Stan says at one point, "Now I know how Hollywood writers feel." The film producer's summary of the situation is direct. You gotta lower your ideals of freedom if you want to suck on the warm teat of China. Mickey Mouse appears in the episode as a character representing Disney. In the episode, Mickey Mouse ensures that Disney's films, the Marvel movies, the Pixar movies, the Star Wars movies, continue to receive approval for Chinese distribution by keeping Chinese officials happy. Mickey Mouse is depicted as ruthless and calculating, perfectly willing to do whatever is necessary to maintain access to the Chinese market, including watching over and managing the behavior of everyone around him to make sure nothing endangers the relationship. When Randy from inside the labor camp tries to maintain his dignity, Mickey Mouse appears to remind him of what is at stake financially and to encourage him to cooperate. The episode's argument was clear and specific. Hollywood, including and especially Disney, had been reshaping its content for years to avoid offending the Chinese government because China represented an enormous potential audience and therefore enormous potential money. Films were edited before Chinese release. Characters were changed. Storylines were altered. The creative decisions being made were not driven by artistic considerations, but by the question of whether the Chinese government censorship office would approve the result. South Park was saying loudly and directly that this process was corrupting American entertainment and that the people doing it had made a choice to value money over creative freedom. The episode aired on October 2nd, 2019. By October 7th, 5 days later, The Hollywood Reporter published a story documenting what had happened inside China in response. A search of Weibo, China's version of Twitter with hundreds of millions of users, returned not a single mention of South Park among billions of posts. Every result had been removed. On Youku, the streaming platform owned by the Chinese company Alibaba, all links to South Park clips and episodes and full seasons were dead. On Baidu's discussion platform, a thread that had previously existed for South Park fans displayed a message saying the section was temporarily closed due to relevant laws and regulations. A search of the show's name on Baidu itself returned almost nothing current. The most recent video result was a promotional trailer from 2017. South Park had never been officially licensed for distribution in China. The episodes and clips that had been available on Chinese platforms were there through a combination of informal arrangements and the general difficulty of controlling what appeared on Chinese internet platforms before the government chose to act. The government chose to act on October 7th, 2019, and what had taken years to accumulate online was gone within days. Parker and Stone responded on October 7th through South Park's official Twitter account. Their statement read as follows: "Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. She does not look like Winnie the Pooh at all. Tune into our 300th episode this Wednesday at 10. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May this autumn's sorghum harvest be bountiful. We good now, China." The reference to the NBA was specifically timed. Just days earlier, the general manager of the Houston Rockets basketball team, Daryl Morey, had posted a single tweet expressing support for pro-democracy protesters protesters in Hong Kong. One tweet. The Chinese government reacted with intense pressure on the NBA. Chinese broadcasters announced they would stop airing Rockets games, and the NBA's response was widely criticized as a rushed attempt to apologize to China and protect the league's business interests there. The contrast between the NBA bending toward China and South Park openly mocking China in the same week was not an accident. Parker and Stone wrote their mock apology specifically to draw that comparison. The tweet received tens of thousands of retweets and hundreds of thousands of likes within 2 days of being posted. A professor at the United States Air Force Academy, Jahara Matasek, later published an article analyzing band in China in military and political terms. His argument was that the episode functioned as a genuine act of American soft power, meaning it used culture and entertainment to advance American values in a conflict with a foreign government, and that the Chinese government's decision to ban the show in response was itself evidence that the episode had landed effectively. He described the episode as demarcating an American shift in information and political engagement against China, and argued that a show being banned across an entire country's internet was not a sign that the show had failed, but rather that it had succeeded at exactly what it was attempting. The episode's two storylines operated as a mirror. Randy chooses to stay in the labor camp rather than compromise, and eventually finds a way out that does not require him to sell his principles. Stan chooses not to make the film and says directly that anyone who would compromise their work for China is worthless. Both characters make the same choice, which is the opposite of the choice the episode argues Hollywood has been making. The episode does not present this as complicated or nuanced. It presents it as a straightforward moral decision. Either you make what you actually want to make, or you let someone else decide what you are allowed to say. And it presents the people who choose the second option as having made a bad trade. South Park has never been officially available in China. Following banned in China, it has not been informally available either. The ban holds. The mock apology was not followed by any actual apology, any outreach to Chinese authorities, or any modification of the episode's content. Parker and Stone made no effort to restore the show's presence in China. They moved on to the next episode, which aired the following week and addressed different subjects entirely. The 6-day machine had done what it always does: identified a target, built an argument around it, broadcast it to millions of people, and absorbed the consequences without changing course. The consequence this time was being erased from the world's most populous country. Parker and Stone's response was 5 sentences of sarcasm and a reminder about their upcoming 300th episode. The China ban is the most geopolitically significant thing South Park ever caused to happen. It is also the least surprising thing South Park ever caused to happen, given the show's consistent history of saying exactly what it thinks, regardless of who is listening, and regardless of what they might do in response. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But geopolitical consequences and censorship battles, as dramatic as they are, represent the show responding to external pressure. The most interesting story in South Park's history might be the one where the show turned pressure on itself, where Parker and Stone looked at what the show had always been and deliberately tried to make it into something different, something more like the prestige serialized television that was dominating the culture around them. The story of that experiment, why they tried it, what went wrong, and what the show's own finale of that experiment was literally called is the next layer down. Section 9. The Serialization Experiment. 3 seasons, South Park tried to be a different show. For 17 seasons, South Park operated on a single foundational rule. Each episode was its own thing. You did not need to have seen the episode before it to understand the one you were watching. You did not need to remember anything from 3 weeks ago. You did not need to track ongoing storylines or keep notes on what a character had said in a previous episode. You watched the 22 minutes in front of you, you laughed, and next week there was a new 22 minutes that had essentially nothing to do with what you had just watched. The format was designed that way on purpose. Parker and Stone had built the show around the 6-day production cycle, and the 6-day cycle worked best when every episode started from zero. A fresh problem, a fresh target, a fresh moral at the end. Clean in, clean out, see you next Wednesday. Then, starting with season 18 in 2014, something began to change. It started small. Storylines from one episode started being mentioned in the next one. Characters remembered things that had happened to them recently rather than resetting to their default state at the start of each new episode. Randy Marsh's personal life began developing in ways that carried forward week to week instead of resetting. The changes were subtle enough that some viewers did not even register them as a deliberate shift in how the show was being made. But Parker and Stone knew what they were doing. They were testing testing something. They were asking a question. What happens to South Park if we treat it more like the kind of television that everybody in 2014 was watching? The kind of television everybody in 2014 was watching was serialized. Breaking Bad had just ended its run and been declared one of the greatest television series ever made. Game of Thrones was at its peak. Shows like House of Cards and Orange is the New Black were proving that streaming services could produce television that people watched all at once, rather than one episode per week. The entire culture around prestige television was built around the idea that a show should have an ongoing story that developed over a full season, rewarding the viewers who watched every episode in order and leaving behind anyone who tried to drop in halfway through. This was the dominant model of ambitious television in the middle of the 2000s, and South Park, a show that had always been proudly, deliberately, structurally the opposite of that model, began moving toward it. Season 19, which aired in 2015, went all the way in. The entire season told one connected story. Every episode built on the previous one. The story followed the town of South Park as it underwent a transformation, becoming more upscale, more politically correct, and more concerned with appearing sophisticated. A new principal named PC Principal arrived at South Park Elementary and immediately began enforcing a culture of extreme political correctness on students and staff alike. A Whole Foods opened in town, which, in the show's logic, represented the arrival of a certain kind of self-congratulating liberal culture that values appearing virtuous over actually being kind. Gentrification, the process of wealthy people moving into poorer neighborhoods and changing them until the original residents can no longer afford to live there, became the central metaphor of the season. Everything was connected. Every episode advanced the same story. The season received strong reviews. Critics who had been covering South Park for years noted that the serialized format seemed to be giving Parker and Stone room to develop ideas more deeply than the single episode format allowed. The argument at the heart of season 19, that political correctness had become its own kind of corporate product, packaged and sold to people who wanted to feel good about themselves without doing anything genuinely difficult, was more sustained and more fully developed than any single episode argument the show had made. The format helped the argument. The argument benefited from having room to breathe. Then season 20 arrived in 2016, and everything became much more complicated. Season 20 continued the serialized approach and pushed it further. The season's central storylines involved an anonymous internet troll called SkankHunt42 who had been harassing women on the school's message boards, the 2016 presidential election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, a global conspiracy involving online trolling, and a new recurring element called member berries, small sentient pieces of fruit that induced nostalgic feelings in whoever ate them. The member berries are worth explaining because they are one of the most specific and pointed ideas the show produced during this period. When someone eats a member berry, the berry begins making them feel nostalgic by saying things like, "Member Chewbacca," or "Member when the Ewoks were in Star Wars." The berries make people feel warm and happy by reminding them of things they loved in the past. But as the season progresses, the berries reminiscing gets darker. They start saying things like, "Member when there weren't so many Mexicans," and "Member when marriage was just between a man and a woman," and "Member feeling safe." The argument the show was making was that nostalgia, the warm feeling of wanting things to be the way they used to be, was not as innocent as it seemed. That the same emotional pull that made people miss old Star Wars movies was connected to the same emotional pull that made people want to go back to a version of the country where certain groups of people had fewer rights. The member berries were a way of saying that make things great again and remember the good old days were the same feeling, just aimed at different things. This was a genuinely ambitious idea. The problem was that season 20 was attempting to tell a serialized story about ongoing events that were themselves changing faster than the 6-day production cycle could keep up with. The 2016 presidential election was the most unpredictable election in modern American history. Parker and Stone, like virtually every pollster and news organization in the country, expected Hillary Clinton to win. They had structured significant parts of season 20 around that anticipated outcome. When Donald Trump won the election on November 8th, 2016, Parker and Stone had to rewrite episodes that were already in various stages of production, scrambling to adjust storylines that had been built around an outcome that did not happen. The 6th episode of the season, which aired the night after the election, had been almost entirely rewritten overnight. The episode showed the town of South Park waking up stunned and unable to process what had happened, which was an accurate reflection of Parker and Stone's own situation in the writer's room. The problem that had been building under the surface of the serialized experiment became impossible to ignore during season 20. The 6-day machine, machine, the thing that made South Park uniquely capable of responding to the world in real time, was fundamentally at odds with serialized storytelling. A serialized story requires planning. It requires knowing where the story is going weeks or months before the episodes air. It requires building towards something specific. The 6-Day Machine was built around not knowing, around starting each week without a plan and letting the world tell you what to write. These two things could not fully coexist. Every time the world moved faster than the planned storyline anticipated, the serialized structure became a trap rather than a tool. Storylines that had been introduced early in the season began to drift. The member berries, which had been a central element of the first several episodes, largely disappeared from the final stretch of the season without the resolution their setup seemed to promise. Caitlyn Jenner, who had been a recurring presence in the season's storyline, similarly faded. The trolling conspiracy that had been the season's main plot became increasingly tangled as it incorporated more real-world events that Parker and Stone had not anticipated when they began. The season's finale aired on December 7th, 2016. Its title was The End of Serialization as We Know It. That title was not subtle. Parker and Stone were announcing, through the name of their own season finale, that the experiment was over. The episode itself reinforced this through its story. The season's central threat, a system called Troll Trace that could expose every internet troll in the world, threatening to reveal the private online behavior of millions of people, is destroyed in the finale. Kyle delivers a summary of what the season had been about. The show effectively hits a reset button on its own narrative, clearing away the accumulated storylines and returning to something closer to a blank slate. Kyle's speech in the episode before the finale is almost a direct statement from Parker and Stone to their audience. We used to have a challenge, deal with it, then move on to the next one. Now we have just been dealing with the same things over and over, week after week, and I do not know about you, but I am getting pretty sick of it. Season 20's premiere episode, titled Member Berries, had actually achieved the show's highest rating since 2006. People were interested in the serialized South Park. The audience responded to the ambition of the format, but ratings dipped across the season's run, and the critical response to the later episodes was more mixed than the earlier ones had received. The sense that the show was losing its grip on its own storylines, that things introduced with apparent importance were being quietly dropped without resolution, was widely noted in reviews. Season 21 returned to the episodic format. Individual episodes, individual targets, individual morals. Parker and Stone did not make a formal announcement about abandoning serialization. They simply stopped doing it and went back to the way the show had always worked before season 18. The response from critics and longtime viewers was mostly relief. The show felt like itself again. The 6-Day Machine worked better when it was not trying to also be a long-form storytelling engine. The two things had different needs, and for 3 seasons, South Park had tried to serve both of those needs simultaneously, with results that were interesting and ambitious, and ultimately unsustainable. What the experiment revealed, more than anything else, is how specifically the show's identity is tied to its production method. South Park is fast because fast is what makes it South Park. The ability to start on Thursday with no idea and finish on Wednesday with a completed episode that responds to something that happened 3 days ago is not just a production quirk. It is the creative engine. It is what separates the show from every other animated series ever made. Serialization required the show to slow down in a way that the fast engine could not support without losing what made it run. The 3 seasons of the experiment also produced some genuinely excellent individual work. The member berries as a concept, the idea that nostalgia and political regression are the same emotional current flowing in different directions, is one of the sharpest observations the show ever encoded into a single recurring image. PC Principal, introduced in season 19, became a character significant enough to continue appearing in the show long after the serialized era ended. The gentrification storyline of season 19 is widely regarded as one of the show's best sustained arguments of its later run. The experiment failed as a long-term structural choice, and succeeded as a creative laboratory that produced ideas the show kept using after it moved on. The finale of the experiment was titled The End of Serialization as We Know It. Parker and Stone named the end of the thing they were ending after the thing they were ending. It is difficult to imagine a more direct way of acknowledging, on screen, in public, that a choice had been made and was now being reversed. The show went back to what it had always been. The machine kept running. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But through all 3 seasons of the experiment, and through the 17 seasons before it, and through everything covered in every section of this video, the controversies, the bans, the deaths, the wars with religions and governments and celebrities, the deepest layer of the South Park iceberg has always been the same character. Not the show's format, not its production method, not its censorship battles. The deepest layer is a fat 8-year-old boy from Colorado who started as an annoying kid and became something the show has never fully explained, never fully condemned, and never fully let go of. His transformation across 27 seasons is the most complicated story the show has ever told, and it is still not finished. Section 10. Cartman's transformation, from annoying kid to the most evil character on television. Eric Theodore Cartman, 8 years old, lives in South Park, Colorado with his mother, Leanne. Overweight, loud, bigoted, manipulative, and according to his best friend Kyle Broflovsky, a fat, manipulative, bigoted, intolerant sociopath. That description has appeared in the show itself, spoken by a character who has known Cartman since they were both small children and has had more time than anyone to arrive at an accurate assessment. Kyle is not wrong, but Kyle's description, accurate as it is, does not explain why Cartman is the most interesting character in the show's history. Villain is too simple a word for what Cartman is. Comedy character is too small a category. The show has spent more than 27 seasons building something with Eric Cartman that it has never fully named, never fully resolved, and never fully stepped away from. And the shape of what it has built is more complicated than almost any discussion of the character acknowledges. Start at the beginning. The pilot episode of South Park aired on August 13th, 1997. In that episode, Cartman gets an anal probe. Cartman is selfish, loud, and convinced of his own importance in ways the world around him consistently fails to validate. He is unpleasant. He is the kid in the group that the other kids tolerate rather than genuinely like. But he is scaled to what an unpleasant child actually is. He lies. He manipulates in small ways. He says things that are mean. He is not, in that pilot episode, something that requires a psychological framework to understand. He is just a bad kid. Watch season 1 with fresh eyes, and the thing you notice is that Cartman's worst qualities in those early episodes are mostly noise. He is prejudiced against Jewish people, which the show mostly uses as a source of conflict with Kyle. He is spoiled by his mother in ways that have clearly produced a child with no understanding of limits. He is selfish to a degree that goes slightly beyond what you would expect from a normal kid his age. But the show treats all of this as character texture rather than character depth. Cartman is the annoying one. The joke is that he is annoying. That is what he is for in the early seasons. Then season 5 happens, and Scott Tenerman Must Die happens, and something shifts in the show's understanding of its own character that never shifts back. The full details of that episode are covered in section 3 of this video. What matters here is what Parker and Stone took away from making it. They have said clearly in multiple interviews over many years that the episode changed what Cartman was allowed to be. Before it, he was a little shithead. Their words. After it, he was the most evil kid in the world. Also their words. And the show treated that transition as permanent. From season 5 onward, Cartman was not just mean in the way difficult children are mean. He was capable of things that required real planning, real patience, and a complete absence of anything resembling guilt or remorse. What makes Cartman genuinely unusual as a character, the thing that separates him from a straightforward cartoon villain, is that the show keeps giving him moments that look like humanity and then revealing what those moments actually are. The humanity keeps turning out to be a weapon. Season 5, episode 13 is called Kenny Dies. In this episode, Kenny is diagnosed with a terminal illness and begins dying slowly over the course of the episode, rather than in the sudden, immediate way he usually dies. Cartman, for most of the episode, appears to be genuinely devastated. He cries. He sits at Kenny's bedside. He lobbies Congress with what appears to be authentic passion to legalize stem cell research so that Kenny might be saved. The other characters and the audience are watching what looks like the first genuine moment of love Cartman has ever shown for another person. Parker and Stone let this run long enough that it begins to feel real. Then the episode reveals what Cartman has actually been doing. He has been using Kenny's terminal diagnosis to lobby Congress for his own reasons. He wanted access to frozen embryos from a Shakey's pizza restaurant so he could grow his own army of sea people. The entire emotional performance, the crying, the advocacy, the apparent grief, it was strategic. It was Cartman identifying an opportunity and using the most effective tool available to him, which in this case happened to be the appearance of caring about his dying friend. The show does this repeatedly across its run, and each time it does it, the effect is different depending on where you are in your understanding of the character. Season 10, episode 8 is called Tist. In this episode, Cartman's mother, frustrated by her inability to control her son's behavior, brings in a dog trainer named Caesar Milan, a real person, a well-known television personality who trained difficult dogs, to try the same techniques on Cartman. The episode is one of the most psychologically direct things the show has ever done with the character, because Milan's techniques begin to work. Cartman starts changing. He becomes calmer, less manipulative. He has a moment, alone, where his internal monologue surfaces and you hear him genuinely wrestling with what is happening to him. He says, in his internal voice, that a part of him knows what he does is wrong, that a part of him wants to be different. The show holds on this moment. It is the closest thing to genuine self-awareness Cartman ever displays. Then his mother kisses him goodnight and tells him she loves him, and something in Cartman's expression shifts, and the episode ends with Cartman having returned completely to his default state, having identified the emotional pressure point that could undo all of Milan's work, and used it deliberately. The moment of apparent self-awareness was real enough to produce a strategy for getting rid of it. Season 7, episode 9 is called Christian Rock Hard. In this episode, Cartman makes a bet with Kyle that he can get a platinum music album before Kyle's band does. Cartman forms a Christian rock band, writes songs that are direct adaptations of secular love songs with the word Jesus inserted in place of romantic references, and succeeds commercially. When he realizes that Christian music does not qualify for platinum album through the standard music industry certification system, and that he has therefore technically lost the bet, he responds not by accepting the loss, but by flying into a rage, saying things that get him permanently banned from ever winning a Grammy Award, according to the show's internal logic, and smashing a gold record over a bandmate's head. He does not reflect on having made a good business decision that happened to contain a loophole. He destroys things and burns relationships because the technicality of the loss is intolerable to him. Season 12, episode 3 is called Major Boobage. In season 14, episode 6, which is titled 201, and is covered in section 5 of this video for other reasons, the show reveals that Cartman's father was Jack Tenerman, a former Denver Broncos player. This is the episode where Scott Tenerman returns and delivers this information to Cartman as revenge. The revelation means that in Scott Tenerman Must Die, when Cartman arranged for Mr. and Mrs. Tenerman to be killed on the farm and then served to Scott in a bowl of chili, he was arranging for his own biological father to be murdered and eaten. Cartman did not know this at the time. He knows it now in episode 201. He cries, and then the camera stays on his face long enough to reveal what he is actually crying about. He is not crying because he killed his father. He is crying because his father was a ginger, a red-headed person, which in South Park's internal mythology carries a specific stigma that Cartman himself has perpetuated across many episodes. The murder, the chili, the half-brother who ate their shared father. None of this registers as something to feel bad about. The ginger part does. That is the most efficient encapsulation of what Cartman is that the show ever produced. 20 seconds of a character's face, the wrong thing being cried about. The show has given Cartman genuine consequences on multiple occasions, and the pattern of those consequences is itself revealing. In Breast Cancer Show Ever, season 12, episode 9, Wendy Testaberger challenges Cartman to a fight and beats him severely and publicly after he has spent the episode mocking her breast cancer awareness fundraiser. Cartman is humiliated. He experiences real physical pain and real public shame. In Human Centipede, season 15, episode 1, Cartman is punished in ways that the show plays completely straight rather than for laughs. In Up the Down Steroid, season 8, episode 2, an elaborate plan to cheat at the Special Olympics goes completely wrong, and Cartman finishes last in every event he enters, beaten by the children he had planned to exploit. The pattern is that the consequences land and then reset. The next episode, Cartman is back. Not chastened, not changed, not carrying any visible weight from what happened. The show's internal continuity allows for Cartman to be defeated in one episode and fully functional in the next, which in a realistic drama would be a writing problem, but in South Park is a deliberate choice. The defeat is the joke. The reset is the premise. Cartman can be punished precisely because the punishment will not stick, and the punishment not sticking is itself the most honest thing the show says about the kind of person he represents. Parker and Stone have both named Cartman as their favorite character to write. This is not surprising. He is the most flexible instrument the show has. He can be a vehicle for satire when the show needs someone to embody a cultural tendency it wants to criticize. His various schemes across the seasons have reflected real patterns in how certain types of people behave in the real world, from his faith-healing scam, to his handling of a class conflict over video games, to his response to being told he is not allowed to do something. He can carry genuine emotional weight when the show needs it, even if that emotional weight is almost always revealed to be in service of something else. He can be the funniest character in an episode and the most disturbing character in the same episode without the show having to choose between those two things. His relationship with Kyle is the most consistently developed relationship in the show's history. Kyle is moral in a way that Cartman is not, and Cartman is aware of this and resents it. The resentment is not simple jealousy. It is something closer to the feeling a person gets when someone near them consistently makes them aware of a standard they are not meeting. Kyle's existence is a standing reminder that the way Cartman operates is a choice rather than an inevitability, and Cartman cannot tolerate being reminded of this. His anti-Semitism toward Kyle, which the show has used as a running source of conflict since the earliest episodes, is easier to understand as a deflection of this discomfort than as a straightforward bigotry. It is easier to call someone a bad name than to look at them and acknowledge that they are a better person than you are. In season 20, when Cartman genuinely tries to be a better person, prompted by a romantic relationship with a girl named Heidi Turner, the attempt is real enough that it runs for multiple episodes. The serialized format covered in section 9 allowed this storyline more room to develop than a single episode would have, but the relationship ultimately follows the same pattern as every other apparent moment of growth the show has given him. By the end of the arc, Heidi has been manipulated into becoming more like Cartman rather than Cartman becoming more like her. The transformation goes the wrong direction, as it always does. The question the show has been asking about Cartman since season 5, without ever fully answering it, is whether he is what he is because of circumstances or because of something more fundamental. The absence of his father, revealed in 201,
provides a possible explanation. The way his mother has raised him, unable to say no to him, genuinely loving him but unable to provide any kind of limit on his behavior, provides another. The show gestures at these explanations without ever letting them become excuses. Cartman's history explains how he got this way. It does not make what he does acceptable or sympathetic. The show holds that line carefully. He is 8 years old, and he has been 8 years old for 27 seasons. And in that time, he has orchestrated the death of his own father, manipulated a dying friend for personal gain, lobbied Congress under false pretenses, led hate movements, committed what the show plays as genuine atrocities on multiple occasions, and tasted the tears of a boy who had just eaten his parents out of a chili bowl. He is also, in the right episode, the funniest character on television. That combination, the genuine horror and the genuine comedy living in exactly the same space, neither canceling the other out, is the deepest thing South Park ever built. Not a message, not a lesson, just a character who holds two things at once that should not be able to exist together, and keeps holding them, season after season, without resolution or apology. That is the bottom of the iceberg. That is what the show has been doing all along. Underneath all the censorship battles and production miracles and real-world tragedies covered across every section of this video, it has been building a portrait of something it refuses to name, using a cartoon child as the frame. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.